Hello, my sweet friends. Welcome back to the Lantern Lit Hollow. Here, stories glow softly and help you drift off to sleep. So grab your favorite blanket, snuggle in nice and cozy, and when you're ready, we'll begin. This evening's tale is an old one, written by the great Hans Christian Andersen in December of 1844. It's called The Snow Queen. Our story begins with a mirror owned by a wicked sorcerer. To his delight, the mirror made everything look ugly and twisted, no matter how beautiful it really was. When people looked into the mirror, they said to themselves, "How stupid I've been. Everything is horrid, and it's not worth trying to be good or kind." One day, the mirror broke, and thousands of tiny pieces went flying across the world. Some pieces were so small that people didn't feel it when a tiny fragment flew into their eyes. They only noticed that everything suddenly looked spoiled and dirty. Worse still were the tiny sharp slivers that flew into people's hearts. They turned them to ice so that they could not feel love or happiness anymore. Meanwhile, a little girl and boy who lived opposite each other were playing happily high above the busy street. Their houses were built so that each floor was wider than the one below, so the top of the houses almost touched. There were window boxes on the top floor in which flowers and roses had been planted. In the summer, the little girl, who was called Gerda, and the little boy, who was called Kay, played together in their tiny garden, while the roses twined above them. In the winter, when the windows were shut, they had to run down all the stairs in the houses to meet indoors. They watched the snowflakes swirling through the window like a flock of white bees.
"There is a queen of the snow, just as there is a queen bee,"
said Grandmother.
"She is the biggest snowflake swirling in the storm."
That evening, when Kay was getting ready for bed, he peered through the window and saw one large snowflake landing on the window box. Before his eyes, it seemed to grow into a beautiful woman dressed all in white. Her eyes shone like stars, and she seemed to shimmer like ice. Kay knew that she was the Snow Queen. He thought she was the loveliest person he had ever seen. But her eyes were cold, and when she beckoned to the little boy, he turned away from the window and snuggled down into his warm bed. For a second, it seemed as if the shadow of a big black bird flew across the window. The next day, when Kay and Gerda were playing outside, Kay suddenly gave a little cry.
"Oh,"
he said.
"I just felt a sharp pain in my heart, as if something stabbed me. And it felt as though something flew into my eye, too. But I feel better now."
Tiny pieces of the sorcerer's mirror were now lodged in Kay's eye and heart, which turned to ice. Seeing Gerda's worried little face, Kay spoke to her coldly.
"What's the matter with you, Gerda? You don't look at all pretty like that. I'm going off to play with the other little boys in the square." But we were going to look at my new picture book,"
said Gerda.
"That's just for babies,"
shouted Kay, already halfway down the street with his little sled. It was not the real Kay talking, but the ice in his heart. In the square there was thick snow. As Kay sat on his toy sled, a magnificent full-size sleigh swept into the square. It was pulled by white horses and moving like an icy wind. In a flash, Kay stretched out his hands and grabbed hold of the sleigh so that he was pulled along behind it. Faster and faster they went, out of the city and into the whirling white countryside. As the sleigh flew over the fields, the snow swirled thicker around Kay. He began to get rather frightened. At last, the strange sleigh stopped, and the white figure driving it stood up. Kay could see it was the Snow Queen, dressed in a cloak of white fur. "Are you cold, little Kay?" she asked. "Come here under my cloak." Kay looked up at the Snow Queen and thought she was more beautiful than ever. He was no longer afraid, but flew on with her in the moonlight, gazing at the twinkling stars above the sparkling snow. Back in the city, little Gerda learned that Kay had disappeared. All through the winter she felt lost and alone, wondering where her friend had gone. Everyone said he must be dead, but Gerda could not believe that in her heart. As soon as spring arrived, she set off to find Kay in her new red shoes. Gerda soon reached the countryside. Before long, she saw a large orchard full of cherry trees. There was a little house there too, with red and blue windows. Out of the house came an old woman. She wore a straw hat covered with beautiful flowers. Gerda was glad to see a friendly face. Soon she had told the old woman all about Kay.
"I haven't seen him here,"
said the old woman,
"but he is sure to come along sooner or later. You can stay here with me and wait."
In fact, the old woman really wanted to look after a little girl just like Gerda. She fed her delicious cherries and let her play in the wonderful flower garden. And she was careful to magic away all the roses so that Gerda was not reminded of home. But the old lady had forgotten about her hat. One day, Gerda noticed that one of the flowers on it was a beautiful rose.
"Oh no,"
cried the little girl.
"I have wasted so much time."
It was nearly autumn, and still she had not found Kay. Without even waiting to put on her shoes, Gerda ran out of the garden and out into the wide world. Poor Gerda's feet were soon sore, so she sat down to rest. A large raven was hopping about nearby. Not knowing which way to turn next, the little girl told him her story and asked for his advice.
"I may have seen Kay,"
said the raven,
"but he has forgotten all about you. He thinks only of the princess."
"Is he living with the princess?" asked Gerda. Then the raven told her about a princess who was very clever. When she had read all the books in the castle and was bored, she decided to look for a husband. But he must on no account be a stupid man. The princess advertised for a husband, and before long the grand staircase of the castle was packed with young men lining up to see her. Unfortunately, when they came into her presence, all of them were too amazed by her pearl throne and the rich decorations to say a word. So the princess sent them away.
"But what about Kay?"
asked Gerda impatiently. Then the raven told how a boy who was not afraid of anyone came along and delighted the princess by talking with her about all of the things that she was interested in.
"Oh, that must be Kay. He is always so clever,"
said Gerda.
"I must get into the castle and see him." "I'll see what I can do,"
cawed the raven, and he flew away. At evening, the raven came back.
"My sweetheart who lives in the castle will let you in through a little back door,"
he said.
"Come quickly."
So Gerda hurried to the castle where another raven was waiting. She crept up the back stairs, and as she did so, she felt that she almost saw swift shadows of swishing skirts and horses and soldiers flitting past. The raven explained that these were the dreams of the ladies and gentlemen sleeping inside. At last, Gerda reached the princess's room. There, sleeping soundly, was a young man. The little girl crept closer and pulled away the cover. It wasn't Kay. Gerda was so disappointed that she burst into tears, waking the prince and princess. At first, she thought they would be angry, but they felt sorry for the little girl and did what they could to help her. Then they gave her some new boots and a golden carriage with footmen to take her on her way. But Gerda's adventures were not over yet. As she passed in her carriage through a dark forest, some robbers jumped out, pulling her from her seat. They could see that the carriage was worth a fortune. Those robbers might well have killed Gerda at once if it hadn't been for a little robber girl who decided to take Gerda back to the robbers' broken-down castle. There she showed Gerda her pet reindeer, but she did not seem to treat him very well. That night, Gerda found it difficult to sleep. High above her head in the rafters, some wood pigeons began to coo.
Oh, oh, we've seen little Kay riding through the sky in the Snow Queen's sleigh. Oh,
They said softly.
oh, she was probably going to Lapland, for the snow and the ice never melt there.
That's true,
Said the reindeer quietly.
the Snow Queen has her summer palace near the North Pole. I know, for I was born near there.
The next morning, the little robber girl spoke to Gerda.
I heard everything last night.
She said,
I will let the reindeer go if he will promise to carry you to Lapland to find Kay.
The reindeer jumped for joy, and Gerda was so happy that she cried. She climbed onto the reindeer's back. Night and day they flew through the forest and the mountains until the reindeer pointed out the beautiful northern lights and told Gerda that they had arrived in Lapland. There was a poor cottage nearby. Shivering with cold, Gerda told her story to the woman that lived there.
You poor child,
Said the woman.
I'm afraid you have many miles to go yet. The Snow Queen's palace is in Finland. I will write you a note to a Finnish woman I know. She will help you when you get there.
Once again, Gerda and the reindeer flew over the snowy landscape until they reached the Finnish woman's home. There was a huge fire inside, so that the inside of the hut was as hot as the outside was cold. The Finnish woman wore hardly any clothes because of the heat, and she immediately helped Gerda off with her coat and boots. When she had read the note from her friend in Lapland, the Finnish woman looked at Gerda and the reindeer.
Can't you give Gerda some special magic so that she can defeat the Snow Queen?
Asked the reindeer.
Gerda does not need any special magic,
Said the Finnish woman.
Her good heart is all the magic she needs. Kay is with the Snow Queen. He is happy there because he has a heart of ice and a fragment of a sorcerer's mirror in his eye. Take Gerda out to the edge of the Snow Queen's garden and put her down by a bush with red berries.
The reindeer did as the Finnish woman suggested, although he was sorry to leave Gerda all alone in the cold snow with her bare feet. Almost at once, Gerda was surrounded by whirling snowflakes. Some seemed ugly and twisted. They moved threateningly toward her like soldiers, but other snowflakes, like white angels, led her on. And so it was that Gerda came at last to the Snow Queen's palace, with its walls of snow and doors and windows of bitter winds. Only Gerda's goodness kept her warm as she walked into a huge ice chamber. There in the middle was little Kay, moving blocks of ice around as if he was trying to solve the most important puzzle in the world.
Oh, Kay,
Cried Gerda, running toward him. Kay stood stiff and cold. He was so pale that he looked almost blue, and he did not greet the little girl who had come so far to find him. But as Gerda threw her arms around Kay, her warm tears of joy dripped onto his face and heart, melting the ice and washing away the slivers of mirror. The warmth gradually returned to his cheeks, and he too cried at the sight of his very best friend. Outside, the reindeer was waiting. The children began their long journey home. As they went, the snow melted and the grass and flowers smelled sweet beneath their feet. At last they saw their own city stretching out before them. Holding hands, they ran through the streets they knew so well. It was as though nothing had changed. Grandmother still sat by the window, and the flowers and roses bloomed in the window boxes high above the street. There Gerda and Kay sat as they had sat before. They were older and wiser, but in their hearts they were still children, and all around them was warmth and light and summer. That brings our tale to an end, my sweet friends. Now it is time to turn the lantern down to a soft glow, snuggle with your favorite stuffy, and let yourself drift off to dreamland. Sleep sweet, my dear friends, and I'll be here when next you return to the Lantern Lit Hollow. Good night.